1989. Japan owns 32 of the world's top 50 companies. The Nikkei hits a record that still stands today. 30 years later, only one Japanese company remains in the top 50. Real wages are lower than 1997. The economy didn't collapse, it did something worse. It froze. And the reason comes down to one decision. Japan chose to keep bankrupt companies alive instead of letting them die. The asset bubble burst in 1990. Stocks crashed 60%, land prices dropped 70%. But the crash wasn't the fatal mistake. Bubbles burst everywhere. The fatal mistake was what Japan did next. The decision was simple: forbearance. Banks holding worthless loans to insolvent companies were allowed to pretend those loans were still good. Nobody forced failures to exit. Instead, banks practiced evergreening, extending new loans to pay off old ones, keeping corpses animated. By the early 2000s, 30% of firms in construction and retail were zombies, companies that existed only because banks refused to admit failure. Compare this to South Korea. When the 1997 crisis hit, Korea forced its giant conglomerates to restructure. Daewoo collapsed, dozens of firms went under. It was brutal and politically toxic. But by 1999, growth had resumed. Korea chose pain. Japan chose delay. Why did Japan make this choice? The logic seemed rational. Force failures and you get immediate unemployment, factory closures, political backlash. Keep zombies alive and maybe growth saves you. From each bank's perspective, admitting loans were bad meant insolvency and shutdown. Better to extend and pretend. This destroyed growth through a brutal mechanism. Normally, when industries get hit, bad firms exit, workers move to healthy companies, capital reallocates, new competitors enter. Zombies break that cycle. They hang on to workers and market share. They depress prices because they don't need profits. Bank subsidies keep them breathing. Healthy firms can't compete against subsidized failures. Investment stops. Innovation dies. The evidence is devastating. Manufacturing productivity, facing global competition, stayed strong. Non-manufacturing, zombified and protected, collapsed. The gap widened from 1.5 percentage points annually in the 1980s to 3.8 points in the 1990s. Resources stayed trapped in the least productive parts of the economy. The stagnation wasn't sudden. Each year looked manageable. Growth stayed slightly positive. But compound 1% growth over 30 years and you get a lost generation. Real wages fell 13% from their peak. Japan became the only developed country where workers got poorer while GDP technically grew. The political logic was simple. Shutting down zombies means visible pain now. The benefits are invisible and long-term. No politician wins bragging about bankruptcies. So the system reinforced itself for decades. By the time Japan finally forced restructuring in the early 2000s, the window had closed. China had emerged. The damage was permanent. The lesson is brutal. Rich countries can stagnate indefinitely without collapsing. No crisis forces change. GDP grows at 0.5% annually. Trains run on time. But beneath the surface, dynamism dies. Innovation slows. Young people lose faith. Japan's mistake wasn't bursting the bubble, it was choosing to preserve failures instead of enabling creative destruction. The country that pioneered lean manufacturing couldn't apply those principles to its own economy. The zombies didn't devour Japan in one catastrophic bite, they just nibbled at its future, year after year, until there wasn't much future left.